Welcome back. You're still watching us here on the Daily Debate to discuss further about the first Russian-African Economic Forum. I'm very much delighted to have joining me here in the studio this evening Dr. Christiane Lehaf, who is an international cooperation expert. Thank you very much for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you for receiving us.
I had a little chit-chat with you before we went on air, and I was very inspired and admired very much the fact that you have a very vast experience when it comes to the African affairs. And from here, I want to ask you, the eyes are all on Africa, and the whole world is rushing in to put a step or sort of mark and help in the development of Africa. And Russia today is no exception. What is the importance of this Russian-African summit today?
Well, as you are saying, Africa-Russian Summit is one of the events that is happening in the year of 2019 that is of great importance to Egypt. Well, actually, the whole world, as you're saying, is looking into the African continent because there are recession we normally or traditionally we always look at the trade with the northern part of the world. But nowadays, the whole world is looking at the African continent, how to get a share in the African continent. Russia is one of them actually nowadays. But what is most important for us in this Africa-Russia summit is how we're gonna really benefit out of this relationship between Egypt and the rest of the African countries, and including Russia in this case. So this is also what we have to look at it. Africa is a continent. There are 55 countries with a population of 1.2 billion and a GDP of about 2.4 trillion. So you can imagine the appetite of the whole world actually in doing business in the African continent. Still, Africa needs everything. You know, if you go to any African countries, they need, you know, the know-how, they need the manufacturing, they need to build actually industrialization base, innovation, and so forth. So you can imagine that all the developed worlds, okay, they want to do their surplus and verse their surplus into the African continent. So it's a very big event. We see that Russia has invited about all the countries, actually the 54 countries. More than 40 countries have responded to the invitation, so they are today in the summit, together with international institutions, regional trading group like SADC, like ECOWAS. So actually it's a very big gathering. And what is more important on this one, this event is coinciding that Egypt is on the top of the African Union. And that's why now we have two big figures is Putin together with our President Sisi.
Now, as you've correctly said, Doctor, the fact that Egypt is running for the African Union presidency, and the African Union has an agenda, a 2063 agenda, that consists of a number of points that they hope to reach by that time. Among them, of course, is sustainable development and so forth. And then the question comes, well, all right, Africa has always been there as a continent. Why is it suddenly shining bright like a diamond, if they say so? Diamonds don't really shine, to the whole world. So now, I mean, it has always been there. Why are they, during this recent period, whether you were talking about China doing equal movements or Russia holding a first such forum, suddenly realizing, well, hello, Africa is here, why not go and invest in Africa?
Yes, because as I mentioned, actually, you know, those big developed countries, they used to have different markets. And those markets now are suffering from recession.
All right.
Okay, so where do we go? Not only that, African continent is full of raw materials for them to produce even their products. So they want to take the share as quick as possible. We have, even from the Arab countries, the Lebanese, they went first to the African continent. We see them, you know, having generation after generation over there. These were followed by the Indians over there. You see big, actually, enterprises in the African continent are led by Indians of origin. And they call themselves according to the country, you know. And then now we have seen the Chinese. Now the Russians are coming on board, and they say, and that's why they are doing the first Africa-Russia summit. So that's why all these developed countries, they have surplus of production. China is a very clear example of this one. So they are trying to put as much as possible, open markets, and even not only that, they go sometimes to dump the markets.
Yes.
In terms of providing, very cheap financing, even the labor is very cheap.
Yes.
The Chinese is very much competing with the Europeans, because don't forget also the one that were really in charge of the infrastructure developments in the African continent were purely, following the colonization, were purely the British and the French. Nowadays, the Chinese are coming over and dumping the market, gaining contracts, big contracts in the African continent.
While Dr. Christiane, the fact that maybe as a normal citizen, a normal African citizen living in this continent would say, well, I understand very clearly how, let's say, since we're talking about the summit, Russia would benefit from Africa, but what am I as an African going to benefit from a country like Russia? What can I take from Russia in return for it to be a win-win situation?
Definitely. We have to look at it win-win situation. And by the way, the whole African continent and countries are looking on, because it used to be one side to win, which is mostly the developed country in this case, which is Russia. But nowadays, the African leaders are very much aware of this, and they want a win-win, as you're saying, situation. So how can Egypt and the rest of the African countries benefit out of this relationship? First, there should come, and as President Sisi in his speech, he invited them to come and invest in the African countries. They don't invest abroad. So this is how actually you create employment in your country. So people to come and invest in your country. Not only that, he called for international financial institutions and regional financial institutions to come and assist those, investment in the African countries. So this is how we can benefit. Come and invest in our countries. Not only that, I heard that Putin also is looking at dropping off the 20 billion, debt for all the African countries. So that's how it should be, and then not only that, we have to use the Russian in the capacity building of our countries, bring us the know-how, and had the industrial base in our countries, not again outside of our country. This is how one of the forms of how it can be a win-win situation, because the traditional way of actually using the African countries is just to get the raw materials out of this without any value addition. Okay, so now we have to look how value add to our raw materials that are in our countries. And Africa is a pure example of till now, okay? Till now, they have a very important base of raw materials that up till now, like the cobalt, like, they take it raw, they go and manufacture it in their own, countries, and then resell it to us with 400 times the price.
Yes.
So why should we do this out of the African continent? That's why President Sisi mentioned, and he stressed on this one.
Now, President Sisi, when he started running in for the African Union presidency at the beginning of 2019, there was and still are a lot of challenges. While, as you correctly said, countries would come and look at Africa as a continent, there are 55 countries within Africa. If you want to look into a win-win situation and in sort of benefiting the entire continent, you need to sort out the regulations between the countries in Africa, and that would require way much more effort than just agreements. What has been done in this regard to ensure this harmony between the African countries to be ready for other big powers and developed countries to invest equally in this continent?
Okay. In 2019, we have a major initiative, which is the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. This African Continental Free Trade Agreement is supposed to have the 54 African countries in one regional group. Okay, instead of having different groups, we traditionally we have 5 or 6. Among them is COMESA, where Egypt is a member in the COMESA countries. So now it has become on a wider scale. They want to regularize and standardize the trade among and make harmonization, make payment system that also President Sisi in Kigali, early 2019.
It's similar to the European Union, you mean, as one bloc?
Yes.
I believe that's been a dream forever, awaited for
Yes,
in
and
Africa.
already Egypt has joined the agreement, so we are there. And also Nigeria and South Africa didn't want to join in the beginning, now they joined. So now we have really good developments that are happening in the African continent and a good enabling environment for trade among the African countries.
Now, you've mentioned something very interesting at the beginning, Doctor, saying, well, the world has changed during the past 10 to 20 years. Recessions and financial burdens. To be very frank, and it's not a secret, establishing factories and large investments in the West is very costly. So they would come and start up in Africa. And maybe that's what made China change its economic system and also be the second world's largest economy because of this strategy. So it seems like now that China has a very important, excellent role model, they want to apply that and fill it in Africa. The fact is that you are requiring employment, so unemployment rates are going to decrease, women empowering, and what it seems to be, if you want to look at this planner agenda that President Sisi is trying to apply on the African Union, and if it it will continue, maybe we spoke about that, what's important is the continuality of this, then we are seeing this agenda being fulfilled under the African Union possibly before 2063. How important is it to keep up with the progress of whatever the heads or states have planned to last for future years and not just be a dream for 12 months?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would believe in the whole of the African countries. They should have their own vision and plan. Because if you don't have a vision of from here till 2063, what are we going to do? And
apply
the
it.
Milestones and the strategy, how we're going to do it. Because I tell you something, we have been out for long now. I'm talking about Egypt with the rest of the African countries. Now, let's take our example of Egypt, in dealing with the rest of the African countries. There should be a clear vision and strategy, what we want really, because I do consider 2019 is just the launching year, of our relaunching of our relationship with the rest of the African countries. This is the startup. But how we're going to do it in the next 20 years? We have to have a strategy. What are the tools you're going to use? The milestones, implementation, what you really want to do with the rest of the African countries, because we don't have to forget. Egypt is in Africa. And Egypt's comparative advantage is really in the African continent. I've dealt with the African countries for more than 2 decades now. It's a long period. It's a long period. And
you know them very well, yes.
And I can tell you, that at this stage, even you don't need to develop your industrial base to have comparative advantage in the African continent. All what you need to do, 2 things, is to know your partner in the rest of the African countries. We don't know them. We don't know anything about, even if you go to our education, we don't know about African countries, how many they are, where can we go. So we have to provide information about the rest of the African countries. This is one thing. Second is we have to have a win-win relationship with them. How can we develop the rest of the African countries and they develop us as well? Because also don't forget that there are African countries, we can use their expertise and know-how.
Yes, of course. Some are very developed, some are a little bit struggling.
So if every African country, they have their own strategy towards the rest of the African countries using the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, because there will be like a free flow of trade. So you can imagine. So we have to rush and use this golden opportunity.
Of course, you've correctly said, Doctor, the fact that up until 2019 started, or maybe before that when President Sisi started running for presidency in Egypt, Egypt was sort of isolated from the entire African continent, and no much information at all was known about a lot of things concerning the African continent. Maybe moving over from your point, relating back to President Sisi's speech today, opening session, he particularly mentioned the percentages of youth living in Africa, the percentages of women living in Africa, very well aware of research and data that has been collected throughout the years to be able to apply strategies under common goals. And it was very triggering, the fact that 60% of the African continent are actually in the youth age. So killing a lot of other issues such as, let's say, illegal immigration or refugees, and a lot of problems that could be overcome with the help of investment from foreign investment from other countries around the world. Raising awareness, because you mentioned here about how well you know the African communities. How well are they aware and how much of awareness raising is happening within their communities about the importance of, number one, unifying and knowing that Africa is an entire continent, and number two, that foreign investment will be for their benefit?
Well, actually, the awareness is not there. Really, it's very limited. I want to say I don't want to say it's not there, but it's not adequate.
Maybe there's no trust between the governments and the citizens.
Well, actually, yes, it was a political decision for everyone to be, you know, after Nasser time. Okay, during Nasser time, we were having very good relationship. Okay, even we helped them in their liberalization, you know, plan. And so far, even President Museveni of he
has special relations with Egypt. Yeah, Egypt is very close to his heart. That's what I know.
So I think we have to catch the train quickly and then go and come back. And I can tell you, you know, from the way I observed the relationship between Egypt and the rest of the African countries, 2019 was a golden year that I always dreamt of, that Egypt to come back to with the rest of the African countries. President Sisi has done very good milestones on this one, but we need, as Egyptians also, and I'm talking about Egyptians, I'm talking about the private sector, I'm talking about the financial institutions, I'm talking about the
entire community,
all the stakeholders, to come and have their own strategy. How can we go and invest on what happened in 2019, and we don't stop there, because my worry is when President Sisi finished his period of 2019, people are just, you know, relaxing. No, he has opened for us the door now. Let's go and invest on what happened in 2019, because I can tell you, the rest of the African countries now, they see Egypt back, and they admire this one, by the way. And not only that, they see the potential of collaboration with Egyptians. So let's invest and go.
And move this forward for forever, not just for a period of presidency.
Our treasure is there. Why are we looking it elsewhere? Our treasure is with our partners from the rest of the African
Well, there's a definitely advantage, the fact that Egypt is not only leading the African continent or heading the African Union in 2019, it's also a gateway to the Middle East. Egypt has managed to have successful stories on different levels, whether it is in its foreign policy, in its economic reform program, in its handling to terrorism. So when Egypt came to the presidency of the African Union, it already had solutions and examples to the very common problems that bind in together the entire African continent. Again, how much weight does that put on the African continent when it comes to the trust or feeling of the comfort between whether it's Russia, China, or whoever, to come and pour in their investment and money in Africa, knowing that it will definitely be a profit-making business?
Okay, also we have a homework to do. We as African countries, we have to create the enabling environment for them to come and invest. We all know that investors will not come unless there is an enabling environment for this to happen.
Stability and security.
It has to be. So also we have to do also our own homework. And I think Egypt has started a lot in this one. Even we have our new investment law, and you know, it's starting there. And with some support of the financial, you know, institutions, now we can do it. And Egypt now is one of the top emerging countries that is attracting, you know, investment. So every country, every African countries also should create the environment to attract those investors to come and invest in their own countries.
Egypt has already started with this process. There are hundreds of projects that are ongoing by Egyptian firms, whether they're the public or the private sector, in Africa. Some of them are known to the public and the media, some not yet due to secrecy issues or confidentiality. But infrastructure is really the base to this. I mean, nobody would come and invest unless you have a proper infrastructure. As a person who has very close ties with Africans, how has that affected the feelings of Africans towards Egypt?
But I tell you something, you know, the infrastructure is not a problem. Infrastructure, like any other project, if it's a viable, you present to the financial institution and to the investor a viable project. Why they don't come and invest?
Yes.
We always say that finance is not a problem. The only problem we have is how to package our request in terms of even infrastructure development. The money is there. And people, even the financial institutions, are looking for viable projects to put and invest, you know, in this one. So we ourselves, okay, we have to look, because don't tell me that an infrastructure project in Egypt is not viable. This is how we package it and attract the investors to come, either financial institutions or entrepreneurs to come and invest in our countries. So we should have some capacity building in terms of how can we package our projects and our requirements for financing. So this is the only thing, but we don't know. Even in exports, okay, you have the exporters, they don't know how to package their product.
Yes,
okay,
that's
to make
true.
it, yes. So we have a good product, you know, and then we don't know how to package it.
Let's talk about the product, and as you've mentioned, we need to do our homeworks, and one of the very inspiring promises that Russia had towards Egypt is the hugest, maybe possibly, a national project that took place, which is the new Suez Canal. Russia setting up major industrial zone comprising at least 23 firms in this planned industrial, or whether it's industrial or logistics, as a form of a hub near Egypt's Suez Canal. I'm going to talk here a little bit more about the Russian-Egyptian economic relations.
Okay. Now, as you are seeing, as I said earlier, that Egypt has become a really attractive market to come and invest. And you've seen now the Russians are coming with 23 industrial zones and, you know, and projects. And not only the Russians, okay, you have other countries, Chinese, you have, you know, Indians that are coming to you, and so forth. So I see that even Putin has said it, President Putin, he has said it, that my trade with the African countries is now 20 billion. I want it to double in the next 4 to 5 years.
This man has a plan.
This means what? This means what? That the potential is there. Okay, it's a matter of leveraging on the potential that is there. So I see that the Russians are seeing that Egypt now has improved a lot and has come out of the years of the revolution, and now there is a stability in the country, and this is where they want really to invest. And that's why Putin now is trying to boost actually the relationship with the African countries. On the top of them is Egypt.
Yes, and of course maybe also one of the things that were mentioned at the opening session today, particularly during the Russia-Egypt summit at Sochi, is the fact that President Sisi welcomed and called in President Putin to come and witness the inauguration of the first bricks of the Dab'a nuclear power plant. Dab'a nuclear power plant is definitely going to be a new phase in Egypt in terms of its energy and sufficiency, and also much more strengthened relations between Egypt and Russia. How do you evaluate that project in particular?
Yeah, I evaluate it as a win-win. Actually, as you are saying, a win-win cooperation and collaboration. So we need to do more on this one, and this is, it's very good, at least that, as you are saying, that now that the Russians are coming to Egypt for infrastructure projects. So why do they come to Egypt for infrastructure project? For strategic relationships. In addition, for the viability of the project. This is what I was talking about. So this is one of many to come.
Which requires a lot of research and planning, whether it's feasibility study or so forth. So
definitely.
Unless you're going to go to these developed countries with a well-planned they won't even look into it. I mean, let's be as frank as that.
There is no free lunch and there is no free money. You know, the money is coming to you because there is a return.
Of course.
So the Russians, they know that there is a very good return coming out of it, not only from Egypt, even from all the African continent. So they need Africa more than Africa needs them, by the way, because, you know, those people, they have a surplus of production. All the developed countries, they have surplus of production.
Definitely.
So what do? We have a deficit. We, as developing country, we have a deficit of production. That's why we are mostly importing.
Definitely.
Okay, those people, they have a surplus.
Or if you look at it from the other way, some countries are being robbed out with the resources and then forced to import. And this needs to be regulated, obviously. So
you said it.
The golden ages have been come to an end.
And on the other side, they need to control also the raw materials.
Definitely.
So in this case, they have no choice except to do a win-win situation with the rest of the African countries on the top of the museum.
Finally, in a brief statement, Doctor, as an expert in international cooperation, how do you view the Egyptian 2030 economic vision or vision in general? And it's very important to know from you, how do you analyze the Egyptian foreign policy? How successful is it and different during the past couple of years under the presidency of President Sisi?
Well, actually, as I said, okay, I'll just tackle the area where is my really, you know, specialty, which is Africa. 2019 for me, it was a dream, actually, that I dreamt of many years back, that I see Egypt back to the rest of the African countries. I don't want to say like we always say that Egypt back to Africa. No, Egypt back to the rest of the African countries, because Egypt is an African. We forgot this one. But President Sisi, under his leadership, okay, and the successful also negotiation to lead the African Union in 2019, I really, you know, admire what is happening.
Yes.
Okay, that's why I'm really keen about what comes after 2019.
Yes, and the speech even has been very different. We see the president on various occasions all the time speaking as Egypt and on the behalf of the African continent, and maybe that's a new speech that we were not aware of. So there's no more selfishness in the fact of Egypt being isolated or towards the Middle East than Africa. No, on contrary. Dr. Christiane Abu Lehaf, an international cooperation expert, I would like to thank you very much for joining me in today. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it was an honor to meet you as well. And that brings us to the end of our episode today. But of course, the ongoing Economic Forum, Russia-Africa, is still ongoing in Sochi, and we will still be following up, of course, on these updates and the final communique here on Nile International. I'm Yasmin Bakir signing off. Thank you very much for watching.